Okay, I've got 25 minutes to bring it home, so I just want to lift the energy up a little bit. So I've got the task of trying to pull it all together, which when you're writing slides and you haven't seen everyone else is always a challenge. But I want to begin with why do I care? And before I do that, I want to give a shout out to geographers, because I studied geography at university and I got a really hard time for it. I started my career at Deutsche Bank and got a really hard time for being a geographer. So all the geography students in this room, all the ex-geographers, just a big shout out to all you geographers. So, woo! So I don't understand forest elephants, I don't understand gorillas, but I did and still love glaciers. I was part of the Alpine Glacier Project, collecting data in the Alps. And I spent 6 weeks camped on that glacier at Findellen Gletscher. And we had a tent, and we'd open the zip, and right in front of us was the Matterhorn. Absolutely beautiful. And that's a guy called Nick Rutter, who is a professor, drilling boreholes. Now, this summer, I got sent a photo from the Alpine Glacier Project. It makes me sad to even say it. That's the same glacier. I don't know if you can see the peak at the left and the peak there and that bit of land. The entire glacier has disappeared. I know you've all seen this on Google Earth, but I spent 6 weeks of my life on that glacier drilling boreholes. Now, the reason why glaciers matter is they are the canary in the coal mine when it comes to climate change and, yes, to biodiversity loss. So since that photo was taken, the CO2 parts per million has gone from 360 parts per million to 420. And we've also heard about just how much biodiversity has been lost. That water has melted, has gone into the oceans, and is causing our sea levels to rise. And the animals and the flowers that live in the Alps are gone. Any of you who are hill walkers and who enjoy the Alps will know exactly what I am talking about. So this is why I care deeply about this issue. Now, I'm not going to go into the science. You've had all the mavens here. Now, the truth is we don't really understand how interconnected it is, but it is like a pack of cards, and we sat on top of it. And if we take one of those cards out, the whole thing will fall apart. Exactly as Willie just said, if we lost 70% of our team, we would literally be in pieces. But that is exactly where we find ourselves today. And just to drive home the urgency, what I've done is I've taken the total carbon budget for the planet and put it in an image and an icon that we all understand. Because this is the thing that every morning I check my phone and it affects my status for the day. If it looks like that, I'm normally pretty worried. But that is exactly where we are. In 1850, the amount of CO2 in the air was perfect. All was good. In fact, we were still okay by 2000. But right now, we are definitely in low power mode. And I promise, I know every single one of you, when you go into low power mode, reduces and changes your behavior. And that is exactly what needs to happen, and is exactly what we've talked about today. Now, the issue that's really been brought home, whether it was by Mark from Capitals Coalition or TNFD, is that we've had huge economic growth. So if you think about it, in 1950, we had about, let's say 3.5 billion people. We're now at 8 billion people. In that time, the MSCI world has grown 110 times. Yes, that's right. If you'd put £1,000 in the MSCI world in 1970, it would now be worth about £117,000. So we have done an enormous and fantastic job at creating economic wealth. However, as we've learnt, we've done that without pricing the externalities. Imagine if I was to put on a rock concert in Hyde Park, invite all the greatest artists, and then say, you know what, to Hyde Park, I'm not going to pay to remove all of that plastic. But that's what we've all enabled the world to do when we pump CO2 into the air, when we allow companies to produce plastic bottles. Because the issue is, and anyone who's in here who's a corporate will know, unless it's on your P&L, unless it's on your balance sheet, you don't care. People talk about owning their P&L. Now, the problem is that our P&L doesn't account for those things. Right at the beginning, John Glenn talked about how we needed to rewire the way our financial markets work. Again, David Craig did the same, and that is exactly what needs to happen. And I believe as we look to the future, There will be very clear survivors in this world. And that will come because another big theme of this conference has been about demand signal. The demand signal isn't as strong, but I promise you it is getting stronger. You've got companies like Patagonia who are absolutely crystal clear about who they are as a business, how they want to operate, and they can still make a profit. By the way, this photo was taken yesterday. I was actually outside when this happened. I was meeting someone there. But Coca-Cola, yes, they've compounded phenomenal returns over the last 100 years. I think they've just announced their 61st year of increasing dividends. But why do we not care about how much plastic they produce, how much plastic goes into the oceans, and the impact that happens? What I think that's going to change is that demand signal goes up. Companies like Coca-Cola won't be able to recruit people to work for them. They won't be able to sell their products, and their cost of doing business will change. And here's the hard truth. Our companies, our economy is a social construct. They only exist because we're people and society, and we only exist because we have a planet. So the truth is, our companies are 100% dependent on the planet that we live in. And in turn, as we've learned today, we are having a significant negative impact on the world. Now, there are many cool things that we can do and absolutely must do. We need to shift and embrace a circular economy. And the sooner that we can do that, the better we can think about how can we continue to produce the goods and services that we need, but reduce their impact. And there are so many good case studies, whether it's your Apple phone that is more and more made from reused and recycled minerals, or clothing companies that are encouraging us to take our old clothes back and recycle and reuse those materials. We've also heard that many companies have made these big net zero commitments. Some of them might be even thinking about making nature commitments. So a third of the largest companies in the world have made these net zero commitments. But candidly, 9 out of 10 of these companies don't really know how to achieve that. That has been the theme of today. We've also talked about the carbon offset market, because yes, people need to measure and understand and assess where they are. They need to change their business models, and only then should they buy offsets. And I think many of you would have read the articles in The Guardian in January talking about the offset market. And so the article said of 95 million credits, so about 95 million tons of carbon credits that had been bought, had actually only offset about 5 million tons. So we all know how we'd feel if we bought a nice item like that Louis Vuitton handbag and then found out that it was a fake. This is a major issue that we need to face into and address. How can we verify and trust that what we're buying is doing exactly what we say it is doing? So we live at this inflection point. We're running out of time. We've lost 70% of our biodiversity, and we've basically got two narratives going on. We've got Just Stop Oil, and I have a huge amount of sympathy for them. And if you haven't read the court reading, it's worth reading them. They're basically found guilty, but basically the judge applauds them for what they've done. You've got Greta Thunberg. Again, her outrage has really raised this issue. On the other side, we've got, well, look, technology will save us. Renewable energy, electric cars, it will all be okay. Well, the reality is this is no longer a time for incremental action. We need bold action, and we need all of these things. And even in a net zero world, we're still going to be producing 10 gigatons of CO2 a year. So right now, we produce about 50 gigatons of CO2 a year. And just to put that in context, that's about 50,000 shards full of CO2 that we're producing every year, like the shards, the big building in London. And even in a net zero world, we're going to be producing 10 gigatons a year. And estimates reckon that about 40% of that carbon offset will come from nature. But we need to do it in a way that we can all trust. And look, there is good news. So Therese Coffey, the Secretary for the Environment, was literally this weekend talking about financial services being critical to this. Aviva have announced a £38 million investment in forestry here in the UK. So there are these little green shoots of hope. But what I wanted to do in the last 15 minutes was talk about two specific pilot case studies that we're working on right now and looking to fund and deliver. So the first of which is Liberia. I was fortunate enough to meet the head of the environment and the head of forestry at COP27. And as you've heard earlier, Waleed and Kathy went over and spent a week with the team. And actually, here's a quote that we literally got in last night. It's important to protect and preserve our natural resources while also promoting socio-economic development for our people in the case of Liberia. We look forward to collaborating with Rebalance Earth to find long-term funding partners to invest in Liberia's natural capital assets. So these guys are really serious. And the two opportunities that they want us to look at are, one is Sapo National Park, and the other is Gola Rainforest. And again, we're going to take a spatial approach to this. So it's about looking at everything. Of course, we're going to look at the forest elephants and the chimpanzees, but we're also going to look at the worms and the insects and the people who support there, the schools, the income, and the jobs. And we need a framework to be able to track and measure against all of these. So how are we doing that? We're using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Some of you will be very familiar with them, some of you won't. But there are 17 of them. The 17th is the partnership. But you can take the 16 and split it into 4 parts. So people, progress, parity, and the planet. And imagine a Minority Report type dashboard where you could double click on those and zoom in and see, well, what is the climate impact that's happening in Liberia? I want to double click on people. What new schools, what new jobs are we creating? How much income are we creating for those people? What if we could track that data in real time? Well, the truth, as you've just heard, is we have the technology to do that. So again, how do we do that? We talked about theory of change earlier. This is a framework that we put together, but it's really begin with the end in mind. Get crystal clear on where you want to end up. And this is not a 100-year project, but this is probably about 10 years. It needs to be long enough that we can make a real difference, but short enough that we can focus on what needs to be done. As we've heard over and over again, we need to define the output, the impact that we want to measure. And this just isn't about animals or carbon, but it's also about people. And we need to make sure that we take everyone with us. Now, the truth with this project and the other projects and other projects that we're working on, they don't need a lot of money up front. They need committed funding. Now, many of you in this room come from the pensions and insurance world, and know on your side of the balance sheet, you're about paying committed income to your pensioners or to your members. Well, these funding projects, they don't need upfront money. They need committed funding for the next 10 years, because that's what's going to give them the confidence to be able to make the change. And because of the blockchain technology that Waleed was talking about, you can ensure that no new money goes in unless you're performing against those KPIs. So those KPIs can be annual, those KPIs can be quarterly. And I'm not promising that all of it will be good. The reality is if you invest in seagrass and a boat comes along and destroys all that seagrass, it will disappear, but you will know it and you will understand exactly what happened. So look, you've already heard Waleed talk about how do we bring together this technology. You've heard about the importance of 80-20. We have enough data. Like if you're a geography geek, the satellite data that's out there for free is just mind-blowing. You can end up just surfing the web for hours on Google Earth, on Zoom.Earth, on all these planetary systems. We've got AI technology, exactly as Waleed talked about. We've got elephant recognition software in the same way that we have facial recognition software at Heathrow Airport. At Plymouth University, we can develop the same for fish and for biodiversity and for seagrass. So we have an ability to make our best effort in 2023 to capture a baseline assessment of where are we today. And at the same time, we can monitor all of that progress, and we can give access to everyone, all of the stakeholders, the funders, the governments, the people who receive that income, to know exactly where are we and get over that trust issue that we talked about earlier. Now, why is this so important? So actually, the first time I met Waleed in person was at COP26. We'd met on Zoom a couple of times. And the president of the Republic of Liberia, Dr. George Mane, spoke, and he said, countries like Liberia, who maintain and protect the largest remaining tracts of forest reserves, receive the lowest benefits for these ecosystem services. We who are the richest in terms of forest resources, which is absolutely true, and biodiversity, are the poorest in terms of socio-economic development. Liberia is one of the poorest countries in the world. I mean, many of us will have been to countries like India, but Liberia is seriously, seriously poor. And it's a crying shame that they're sat on this green gold mine, and yet they're one of the poorest countries in the world. And we want to help unlock that and reverse that. We did want to have someone from Liberia here. I think there was meant to be someone from their embassy here. We were hoping that we could fly someone over, but unfortunately with visas it was more challenging. But look, many of us in the room are UK-based. We work for UK corporates, and just in the same way with our pension funds, we've tended to prefer investing in UK equities and UK bonds. I want to talk to you about a UK opportunity, and I want to talk about investing in Plymouth and Plymouth Sound National Marine Park using that same UN SDG framework. For those of you who don't know, this is a map of Plymouth, but the great thing about Plymouth is it's a city of 250,000 people. To the north, we've got the moors. We've got a river, the River Tamar, that flows through it. And then we've got the seas and the ocean. So the ability to define an area and have multiple geographies in one place and track that is just such an amazing opportunity. Now, the great thing about Plymouth, and some of you may know this, is that they were the first to announce a national marine park. So we have 15 national parks in the UK, but they announced that they were going to have a national marine park off Plymouth Sound. And we've got some of the team over here, the Plymouth team over there, give a wave. And the other thing that they've got is they've got a council that has a very clear long-term plan. They've got the Plymouth Plan, and their goal is to be a great place to live, work, and visit. Now, this they wrote before all of this, because actually the biggest challenge, like all councils, like pretty much everything in the UK right now, is where are we going to get the funding from this? And these guys have so many opportunities to unlock, but what they need to be able to do is tap into the funding, this effectively green dividend that exists as the corporates start to recognize the liability that they have, that need to pay for that carbon capture. Remember earlier, the price of carbon is now $100 a ton. That is insane. And use that money to fund the transformation. Now, the thing about Plymouth, I want to start with the people, is that Plymouth is one of the poorest cities in the south of London. Typically, we think that the northern cities are the poorest, and then the southern cities are okay. Well, unfortunately, Plymouth never really recovered when the MOD reduced their kind of exposure to the Navy in the south. And actually, despite having 3 universities, keeping top talent in Plymouth is really, really hard. Actually, if I hadn't studied geography, I wanted to be a marine biologist. And if you want to be a marine biologist, there is no finer place than Plymouth to go and study. Now, the other thing I didn't realize about Plymouth is it's not only the largest naval base in the UK, it's actually the largest naval base in Western Europe. And in order to make all of this work, we need to make sure it works with the MOD and the Navy, as well as with the national capital, as well as the people who live there. As we've already heard from Ralph, this isn't about seagrass. I want to make sure, I'm going to talk about seagrass in a moment. This is about taking a total ecosystem approach. And again, we don't have mangroves in Plymouth. I mean, some of you will know that. But we do have tidal marsh, we have kelp, we have seagrass. And I have become a seagrass geek. I almost love seagrass as much as glaciers. And here's the crazy thing. We've heard about how it's a $1 trillion opportunity, but a hectare of seagrass sequesters 35 times more CO2 than the same amount of rainforest. So restoring a little bit of seagrass in the UK is a phenomenal opportunity. And Roger over there is the CEO of the Oceans Conservation Trust. And here's the crazy thing. In the UK right now, we only have 7,000 hectares of seagrass. But 100 years ago, we had 70,000 hectares. So think about it. This morning, John Glenn said, wouldn't it be great if we could restore 5,000 hectares? We used to have 70,000 hectares of this wonderful seagrass. And by the way, it is wonderful stuff because it's not just about carbon sequestration. It improves the water quality. It improves coastal protection. But this is the thing that blows my mind. It's a nursery for wildlife. Each hectare supports 80,000 fish and over 1 million invertebrates. And here's the crazy thing. In the UK, fishing industry is 10,000 people. It used to be 20,000 people. Last year, we caught about £1 billion worth of fish. The reason it can't be any bigger, the reason why we can't hire any more people to operate in the fishing industry, is we don't have enough fish. If we start to restore our seagrass around the UK, we have more fish, we have more food, we have more jobs, we create economic growth. And these are some photos taken in Plymouth Sound of using these bags to try and plant seagrass. Now, planting seagrass isn't an easy thing to do. And again, if you want to know more about this, there are some serious experts in the room. But again, this all needs funding. But again, this is pure additionality. This is seagrass that is native to the UK. We have maps going back 100 years that tell us exactly where that seagrass is. We just need to protect what we have, those 7,000 hectares, and then we need to start planting and restoring the seagrass. But it's not just about Plymouth and Plymouth Sound. In the UK, there is so much opportunity. We have 15 national parks. We've got the CEO of Brecon Beacons here. Again, a beautiful, if you haven't been to the Brecon Beacons, it is a stunning place to visit. But it is severely degraded land. Their rivers are some of the worst rivers in the UK. In fact, we know that our rivers in the UK are just really terrible, and we need to fix that. And again, the opportunity to transform all of our landscapes, to restore peatland. Peatland, again, is a slam dunk in terms of carbon capture. So if we just want to capture more carbon in the UK, peatland restoration and seagrass and all the environments that go with that are just a fantastic opportunity. But it's more than that. We talked earlier about why is it that the first thing that we need to do is use cement to do things? Well, it turns out that beavers are much better at helping us deal with flooding. It's almost like AI for flood prevention. They basically build their dams and they dynamically change where they live in their dams depending on the river level. Much, much better than building cement. So again, in Plymouth, we have a compare and contrast study happening right now between man-made cement solutions and nature tech, 4 billion-year-old nature tech that I promise you is way better. And all of this, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't need trillions of pounds. In the UK, we could transform our entire ecosystem for a couple of £billion. So look, that was me. I wanted to bring to close, hopefully, that there's a very clear sense of how we can pull it all together. We'd love to talk to any of you about investing in any of these projects or the other pilots that we're working on. And now it just brings for me to just wrap up the whole conference. And so look, the first thing I wanted to do was thank you for coming. This conference didn't exist 6 weeks ago, so literally the fact that you guys have given your time and your energy to be here is just amazing. At the break, someone said to me, he said, look, Rob, this has been amazing. I feel like I've done 3 months reading in one day. I promise you there won't be a test when you go home. But actually, at the same time, I do recognize that it can be a bit of information overload, and I want to come back to actions and next steps. The second thing I want to do is thank the speakers and the panelists. We've had 36 speakers and panelists. That's why there's been so much information. I mean, these are the real mavens of this industry, downloading 20, 30 years worth of experience. So a round of applause for all the panelists and speakers. And look, putting on these events costs money. So again, I wanted to thank EY, Axis Investment Management, Federated Hermes, Nature Alpha, and Mallow Street for supporting in making this happen. And look, finally, I also want to thank the Rebalance Earth and Mallow Street team. So any of you who put on a conference know that there's a lot that happens behind the scenes, registering people, stuff goes wrong. So again, a round of applause to the Mallow Street team and the Rebalance Earth team. So look, I just want to, before we leave, it can be quite depressing to think about climate change and biodiversity loss. And I just want us to pause and think about 3 reasons to be optimistic. So look, the first thing is, in the last 20 years alone, the proportion of people living in extreme poverty has halved. That's massive. That's huge. We still need to do more, but let's just celebrate the quick wins. That's not a quick win, by the way. That's a huge win. Deaths from hunger are down 98% in the last 100 years, despite the world population going from 2 billion to 8 billion. Again, that's a massive, massive win. 50 years ago, we didn't think we'd be able to feed everyone on the planet. We now know we can feed everyone on the planet. The food is in the wrong place. We waste food, but we absolutely know that we can feed 8 billion people. Again, an extraordinary achievement. And thirdly, 90% of girls globally are in primary school, and that's up from 65% in 1970. So we've still got 10% to go, but again, a remarkable achievement. So the so what of this is, as humans, as society, we've faced into some pretty difficult problems. They felt insurmountable, but somehow we found a way through. And I think the opportunity is exactly to do that. We've learned today that this isn't about solving climate change, because unless we solve the biodiversity problem, we can't solve climate change. The second thing is that hopefully you've learned that nature and biodiversity is the very solution and the very answer to solving climate change. And so I suppose I want you to take home 3 calls to action. If you work for a company that is thinking about, is investing in voluntary carbon offsets, or wants to invest in high integrity nature credits, wants to invest in Plymouth, wants to invest in Liberia, wants to have a conversation, please get in contact with Waleed and me. Second of all, if you work for an organization or a charity or a trust, like Plymouth National Park, like the Brecon Beacons, like the River Trust, like RSPBB, like AWF, and you have natural capital that you know with some funding, some committed funding from the right funders, will absolutely transform things. Again, please get in touch. If you were here to learn, hopefully you felt informed and inspired. And I just have one ask of you. Spread the word. Explain the problem, but at the same time explain that we have a solution. And the theme of today has really been about being bold, about collaborating, and let's get things done. And I just want to close out on one of my favorite quotes, which is, whatever you can do or dream, you can. Begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. So take that magic, make it happen. Thank you very much, and have a safe trip home.